This week on the Wealthy Pilots podcast, we're going to break down what's going on with these LOA contracts that is happening out there. United Airlines voted down on theirs for 2024. So we're going to let Scott break this down and kind of clue us in as to what this is all about. What's going on, my friend? How you doing this week?
Good, Mark. How are you?
Doing fantastic, man. Merry Christmas. It's the day after. Did you get good stuff?
Here we go.
Yeah.
I got all the golf presents for myself ahead of time, and
okay.
Them, so I got everything I ever wanted. Yeah,
nice.
Awesome.
Well, there you go. Hope all the viewers are checking it out. Maybe they're sitting around, checking out their presents or something the next day, and they want to catch up on some of the airline things that are going on out there. So let's break some stuff down for them. What is this? What are we talking about today?
So, in essence, it's not necessarily their union contract, so to speak, but there's an aspect of it here where a lot of the airlines have what they call like a market-based cash balance plan. And a lot of the retirement savings plans in the different airlines, it's basically a way that they can help, a tax advantage way to help compensate their pilots in a very effective way. They have to get special kind of IRS authorization for these plans because they're uniquely driven for each airline, and they're unique for our pilots because our pilots are such critical components of the airline industry, obviously. And the airline industry is such a critical component of the U.S. economy and just how we can operate as a nation. So it's pretty cool, like how unique their compensation is. It's not, they're paid very differently than executives, but it's somewhat similar in terms of, the high levels of automatic contribution that they get. And when they hit the IRS maximum for the 401k, you have this kind of phenomenon that we call where it spills over. So if you picture the 401k as a bucket, you have the employee contributions and then the employer contributions, which are a pretty large amount, normally around 17% based on which airline you fly for. And then when you hit that bucket of, for next year, it's like $70,000, you spill over where because of how much the pilot is making, the airline employer contributions actually go above the IRS limit for the 401k. And so what these airlines have to work through then is, okay, what do we do with that money? Do we just pay it to them as compensation and then they're taxed on it? Well, a lot of the pilots are like, well, I don't want it as compensation. I don't want it to hit my paycheck in my highest earning years. I want to defer that compensation. And so that's what's kind of led over time where the pilot compensation has increased and the amount of contributions have increased that, these different airlines have had to come up with different plans. And so it's somewhat problematic because the airlines are interpreting the IRS guidance a little bit differently. And so you see like an American and a Delta already have adopted this market-based cash balance plan. And then they give the pilots an option. Do you want to opt into it? At the time when they were adopting the plan, do you want to opt into it? Do you want to opt out? If you opt out, they pay it to you on your paycheck. If you opt in, they put it into a separate account where you don't have access to it. You can't invest it. It's automatically invested basically into some target date fund. So some people are like, yeah, that's fine for me. But, for a lot of folks, they're like, well, I don't want to go into some conservative target date fund and miss out on growth. So I'll take the money and then I'll invest it. So it just kind of depends on each person's preference when they were first opting in. Now, all the new people coming in, they're automatically getting put right into that plan. So they don't really have a choice.
So the different airlines, then they kind of vote on these kinds of things. So some have it, some don't, right? So why did United choose not to?
So, it came down to, they have some other aspects with like their retirement health accounts or their RHAs where they are able to get contributions from the company and into those accounts if they're taking the company's healthcare plan. Like some of our folks are retired military, so if they're on TRICARE, they're exempt from that anyways. And so it was coming down to like, hey, if you're going to go into this market-based cash balance plan, then you're going to have to forfeit some of the other contributions that the company is doing. And so it was creating a big rift where people, were kind of feeling like, well, I'm missing out on that money then. And it was significant, like pushing $15,000 for some of the higher earners. And so, it all adds up, right? And so you don't ever want to feel like when they're ratifying some sort of contract or ratifying an LOA or an amendment to the contract, that they are ever taken away from what our pilots are working for. So I completely agree with that. And it was kind of interesting because if you read up on it too, like even the United Airlines leadership said, we did not come to the table with our best foot forward, and we need to get back to the drawing board. So, it was voted down pretty easily. And so they're going to go back and try to get it shored up. So, but a lot of the conversations I've had with people too is like, hey, at the end of the day, if we can figure out how to keep more of the money in your control and find other tax advantage ways to invest it, that's not a bad thing either.
I was going to say, is that what you kind of see from people coming in to do work with you and have you start to be their financial professional? They kind of, I think most of us want more control, right?
Yeah. and it's a trade-off, right? I don't want to pay I don't want to pay 40% income tax to get control, but at the same token, if I can, have the opportunity to control how my money is invested, maybe I do take that upfront hit and then try to get it back over time. So it kind of depends on, what shakes out for them in terms of, how close am I to retirement versus if I'm a younger pilot. If you're a younger pilot, I would probably say you want to opt out of it, take it in pay, invest it into a different account, make sure you're maxing out some of the other accounts that we're going to talk about in our next episode, and then get that kind of tax hit back from growth. And then, you have it tax-free when you're older in retirement. If you're a few years out from retirement, it probably makes sense to just defer it and put it into that market-based cash balance plan. So for a lot of when Delta was going through this, a lot of the younger guys, we would recommend opt out. For some of the more senior guys, are like, well, just go into it, because you need to be building up some conservative money anyways. But if you got at least 10, 15 years left or more to fly, probably makes sense to get the money in your hands and be able to invest it aggressively. So, because you can kind of make up for those upfront taxes that you have to pay to get it to you in terms of payroll. So,
it feels like when you're explaining that the similar argument that people have had for years about Social Security, right? Like you don't have this choice, you have to do it. But could we manage this money better ourselves if we were allowed to just take the money that we put into Social Security and use it for our own retirement? And how much more could that be? And so it kind of feels like that same kind of conversation in a specialized kind of niche kind of way for these airlines. But it's a chicken and the egg feeling for a lot of people. Like, do I take control, or do I allow them to do it for me and make my my life simpler, but maybe lose out on the upside?
Yeah, if you're a hands-off person and you don't really want to think about what's going on with your money and you just want to keep it in, then just put it in there and let somebody else handle it. But if you're like,
well, that's a target date fund. That's the reason they created target date funds.
Is for the person that doesn't want to work with somebody and doesn't want to think about it.
Right. Yeah. I don't want to mess with it. Right.
Yes. Yeah. And so, that's fine for some folks, but if you're like, hey, I want to be getting good aggressive returns here, probably sticking it into that conservative market-based cash balance plan is probably not the right move. So,
right.
But it'll be interesting to see, what happens here as after the first of the year, when they start getting back together and start to review what their options are. Cause I think they got to figure out how to get these guys paid fully out in their RHA and not have any negative implications to that. And it sounds like the United Airlines, leadership needs to do a little bit of benchmarking with some of the other plans, because it seems like they're interpreting some of the IRS guidelines a little bit differently than some of the competitor airlines out there. So, but it's it sounded like the pilots union was definitely doing their job and representing the best interest of their folks that are flying out there, which is good. So you like to see that, but. At the end of the day, it's one of those things where I think when the time comes, should be next year sometime, when it does come that it's time to make a decision. Yeah, it's definitely worth thinking about your long-term plan and even short-term. What kind of investment performance are you looking for with your investments? And then you can, because I'm fairly certain the United folks too will get an option. The existing guys will get an option. Do you want to opt in or opt out of it? So,
all right. Well, if you've got questions and you're worried about, just having control over your own retirement situation, obviously, this is the Wealthy Pilots podcast. So if you are in that kind of situation, reach out to Scott and have a conversation with him. He is the airline advisor, and you can find him online at retireairlines.com. That's retireairlines.com. We'll have links in the show descriptions below. So make sure you click on all that good stuff, and don't forget to subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. And we'll see you for the next episode of the Wealthy Pilots podcast with Scott Osborn. Scott, my friend, enjoy your new year. We'll have a conversation right after that. So happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year, brother. We'll see you in 25.
So weird.
It is weird.
We'll see you in 25 here on the Wealthy Pilots podcast with Scott Osborn.
Information is for illustrative purposes only and does not constitute tax, investment, or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified investment, legal, or tax professional before taking any action.